Tēnā koutou, nau mai haere mai ki te whare hau, te whare matihiko, te whare ipurangi o Dockage Schools. It's been a bit of a wild journey actually through COVID. We would usually be in theatres right now, showing in Auckland and showing in Wellington, but because of social distancing and so on, we committed to the idea of going online for 2020. Yeah, quite a sharp turn, and we've all had quite uh, a strong learning curve. But here we are, and we've got here, and we're thrilled to present to you today Objector, which is about the conscientious objection of a young Israeli woman, where in Israel um, it's mandatory to serve in the military when you're of military age. So she said it's not something that fits with my morals and ethics, and I refused to go. And she was put in prison. But Tamkeen, we're lucky enough to have Tamkeen say,
Hi.
Tamkeen,
Hi.
am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. Well, Tamkeen's from the Peace Foundation. That's correct, isn't
Yeah.
it?
Hmm.
Excellent. And we'll be having a conversation after the movie, so students can come and go and ask questions of us all, and we'll just have a good conversation about some of the issues that have been raised in the film. Now, you've already seen the film, or you're going to watch with us, Tamkeen?
I'm gonna watch with everyone.
Excellent. So it'll be fresh in
Oh,
mind.
yes.
First off,
I
let me.
can,
Oh, sorry, you go, Alicia.
oh no, I was just going to say I can post the link in the chat if you want.
That would
I
be
already have it
fantastic.
open.
So for any teachers and students watching, please have the questions as they come up. Make a note of those and post them in the chat box. And if you're feeling especially brave, there's a little icon down. I think it's above your chat, which says "Speak," and that will allow us to bring you up on camera, and we can engage that way. But before anything, I'd like to thank the Ray Foundation, who make the whole Dockage Schools program possible, and we're very grateful to continue this good work, which allows education and conversation. And these documentaries are produced from a certain point of view, and they're presented from a certain point of view, and it's always good to get different perspectives on things as well. So we're looking forward to hearing your input, Tamkeen.
Thank
Um,
you.
Do you
and
have a account to watch the film? Or have
I
you
yeah.
signed
I
up
think
to anything?
I don't think I've signed up yet, but I can do that quickly just now.
Cool.
cool. Okay, Alicia, if you can help Tamkeen through that, that would be great. Uh, yeah. So, Alicia, what's your initial thought of the basic quote of the movie here?
Um, yeah, well, as someone who is Indigenous, I believe in self-determination. And I think also it kind of shocked me that it's now, and it's people who are younger than me, like people who are, approximately 10 years younger than me, are going through this, and the fact that, young children, I have nieces who are about the same age as the little boy in the film, and like I just couldn't imagine that they have to think about it. So yeah, I think I was quite shocked but quite motivated by the main subject, or the person, and actually all the people who were saying, like, you know what, this is not, yeah, this doesn't fall in line with what I believe in. But also, like, because I imagine it would be kind of terrifying to have calling out your own government, your own nation, for the injustice that they're doing. And so yeah, I did have to watch the film a couple of times to kind of receive and like understand what was going on. So yeah, a whirlwind of emotions that ultimately I don't even know them, but I'm really proud of them.
Well, I mean, I'd like to give a special thanks as well to a man who first brought my attention to conscientious objection, Des Dubelt. He was a family friend, and it was only into adulthood that I learned that he was a conscientious objector in New Zealand during World War II. So in World War II, there was conscription, and it was mandatory if you were of military age to sign up and go to the war. And if you didn't, you would be put in prison, and they threatened to shoot them as well. But he was so strong in his morals that he, or personal belief, that he was refusing to go. So I'll post a link to an interview I did with him 20 years ago, where post 9/11, post the terrorist attacks on America, and there was talk in the media about reintroducing conscription and mandatory military service in the draft. About if we went that way, what were his experiences from history about pros and cons of resisting conscription. So yes, all interesting conversations to be had, and he would have been 100 today. So sending love to Des's family if they're watching. So let's kick it off. Thanks again to Ray Foundation. Thanks again to Tom Keen. Thank you. We'll also be joined by Ilan, I think is how we pronounce his name, Bloomberg. At the end, he's an ex-Israeli soldier who, on his own principles, decided to put down his guns because he didn't agree with the actions of his country's military. So, first of all, you can see Alicia has posted the schools.docedge.nz film Objector link in there. If we click that, or if you've got your page open now, that will take you to...
Pumpkin might need, those like special emails that you click to like make an account.
Yeah, that's cool. Pumpkin will be in touch with you. We'll close our camera and we'll close our microphone, but we'll email you everything that you need to get started.
Okay, great.
Cool. Okay, so if you go to the Objector page, and underneath that there is a pink rectangle which says play now. So if you push play now, it'll take you to the film. Okay, enjoy, and we'll meet you back here in approximately 75 minutes, but we'll give you a heads up. Enjoy the film. Quite an amazing movie, but more than a movie is that you've lived through something like that. Can you give us a little bit of a background about how or just give us an introduction about who you are and how you relate to the movie?
Okay, so I'm Ilan. I am Ilan Bloomberg. I went to live in Israel. I lived in Israel on and off for about 12 years, the last time being from 1995 to 1997, which is when I did military service. I knew that conscription was a part of living in Israel, and I guess Israeli society being what it is, I knew that was an indispensable part of living there. To understand Israeli society, I felt you needed to do the army. So I was okay with that.
Sure. So you had not been living in Israel previous to that?
I did. I grew up in Israel. My parents went to live in Israel when I was 5 years old, from South Africa. So we lived there for about 4 years at that stint, and then it's a second separate period from 84 till 87 or 88. And so I've lived in Israel on and off. Well, I did live in Israel on and off between up until the age of about 25. I spent a lot of time in Israel, either on youth programs through my Jewish youth movement that I was a long time member of, or by myself when I went to live in Israel at the age of 24 or something, thereabouts.
Sure. So you, at what age did you? So you joined the army?
Yeah, I joined the army. Because of my age, they staggered the required serving time by your age, and so if you go in straight from high school at the age of 18, you do 3 years. If you go in later, you do 2 years. If you go in after the age of, I think, 28, you only do 6 months or something, or 4 months. But because I was living in Israel when I got my first call up, which was at the age of 16, I was expecting to have to do 3 years of military service, even though I was going in at a later age. My call up process started when I was much younger, and I was living there. So just by sheer fluke and a technical error, I managed to only serve 1 year, and that was in 1996.
So what was it like when you entered the army, and you felt like you were maybe in the wrong place, or not? It wasn't everything you expected. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of going from joining to not wanting to participate?
Okay. When I joined the army, because I speak fluent Hebrew, and obviously my English is fluent, I was intended to be a education officer. So basically going out to schools, being part of outreach programs. I was never supposed to be a frontline soldier. And I was okay with that position. It seemed like a pretty cushy position. I didn't have to be in the West Bank. I didn't have to, I still had to carry a gun, but it was not what I thought it would end. How it ended up being was I was sent to a base to wait for the next training program to start so that I could enroll in the education course. And they said, just wait here for a couple of weeks until the next course opens. And 6 months later, I was still there. And I was at a base that had been allocated for closing down. So they were going, so at the time they were closing down that base, and so they only left a skeleton crew of soldiers there to guard basically ourselves. So a whole lot of empty buildings, a whole lot of empty tents, and sort of a crew of about 18 soldiers and commanders who were there just doing round-the-clock guard duty, raids, incursions into Palestinian villages. We had there was a water tank that provided all the drinking water for our base, which was located next to a Palestinian village, and there was a electrified fence around the water tank. And if anyone touched that fence, it was an alarm went off at our base, and we would all jump into our gears and rush off down the road to deal with whatever it was that was sabotaging or otherwise our water supply. And that happened fairly frequently. And, if we found nothing, which was most of the time, it was kind of an excuse to cause trouble a little bit. And so what would happen was we would go down to the water tank, do our inspections, and then we would go into the village and turn it upside down. We'd go into people's homes. We would pull everything off the walls, upturn the beds, searching for anything incriminating that might indicate, terrorist activity or anti-Israel activity. Or there wasn't much of a pretext for these raids. There was no warnings, and I guess it very quickly became evident to me that what we were doing there was highly questionable, immoral, violent, aggressive, and unwarranted. And so I was already ideologically opposed to serving in the West Bank, but I'd been told when I told my base commander that I didn't want to be there, he said, if you repeat that statement, you'll end up in military jail. So don't say that again. So I knew I had to get out. And the only way that I could legally get out of that base was to use my right as a lone soldier. So I was there without my parents, but I was entitled to a 1 month visit to my family overseas to connect with them. And so I begged my parents, who were living in New Zealand at the time. I said, look, you've got to get me out of here. I can't get off this base. Conditions are pretty terrible. And so I got out of the base, came to New Zealand for a holiday, and on return, I refused to go back to that base. I was prepared at that point to go to jail for that, in order to not have to go back. Fortunately, they said, okay, well, if you don't want to go there, we'll send you somewhere else, and they did, and they sent me to a base within Israel, and I served out the rest of my service at that base. And then within within 2 weeks of completing my military service, I'd left the country, and that was 22 years ago.
Wow, so that's quite an experience. So you were compelled to return to Israel, even after you'd said that you didn't want to serve in the West Bank.
Well, I was still under conscription. I was still committed to being in the military, and I still committed to being in Israel. But there was no ways I was going back to that base. It was, there's bad situations in the army, and that was an unhealthy place to be, emotionally and on lots of other levels.
So with the incursions, was it mostly a commander saying, okay, we're getting organized to go into these villages, or was it like the soldiers taking any excuse just to get up and go?
No, the commanders, you don't do anything without the commander's authority. As soon as if you leave the base, you are under command. And so as soon as the alarm went off for our water tank being touched, or the fence around it being touched, and that could have been a stray dog, could have been anything. That was us that was the signal for us to jump into get our helmets and our guns and our ammunitions, and basically just jump into the trucks and head off down the road to check out the water tank. And it was a combat situation. Well, we were prepared for a combat situation, but it never was.
So did you bring up your reservations directly with your commander, or did you? What was the process for you deciding that this wasn't a good situation to extracting yourself?
Well, I said from the beginning, from very early on, I said, look, I'm not happy being here. This is not the place for me. It's not a place for any of us to be. It's wrong, and I'd like to leave. And that's when he said to me, you need to be keeping those thoughts to yourself.
Did you discuss with fellow soldiers, or was it just a one-on-one conversation with your commander?
There were a few of us who were sort of leaning towards not sort of left-leaning soldiers who were not into being there. But I was by myself in my quest to get out. I formally asked to be released from that base. And when that didn't work, I had to use the get out of jail free card.
Yeah. Wow, it's one thing that really struck me about the movie is that the openness of the dialogue and the courage to actually have these kinds of conversations. And I think really in all conflict situations, a discussion is the first point, and then working out how to affect change one way or another. We're lucky enough to have Tamkeen Said from the Peace Foundation here as well. So, Tamkeen, I'd like to hear from you about some of your thoughts about the approaches for conflict resolution and the openness of communication towards getting a peaceful outcome in these situations.
Yeah, totally. Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can hear you just fine.
Okay, great.
By the way, if you haven't met, this is Elan. Elan, this is Tamkeen.
Hi, nice to meet you.
You too.
You have an extremely powerful story, so it's so interesting to listen to, and I'd love to hear more about it. But yeah, so what I do at the Peace Foundation is I have workshops with students that revolves around peaceful conflict resolution, and I think that what's really amazing about the film that we just watched and the story of the main character is that what she raises is a lot of the main threads that we're trying to work in as well here. In that I wrote down a quote that she said at one point. I asked myself, what can I do? I have the power to change things here myself. And I think that's the driver of peaceful conflict resolution for me and for a lot of the people that are working in that field here, is that it's one conversation at a time. It's recognizing individually we all have power, and a lot of the themes in that movie are so universal and so relatable, especially with everything else that's going on in the world right now. It's very important to recognize that each of us have power in our own capabilities and in our own thoughts and morals. And yeah, I think obviously the issue is incredibly complex and intricate and divisive, but it's really powerful to be able to watch her story unfold in the way that it did, and the conversations she was having one at a time, and that created a snowball effect in being able to create bigger change just from recognizing that she has power in herself. And that's a lot of what we do here with students as well, is trying to implement that thought and that feeling in young people around the country, to know that they have that same level of power and strength in the decisions they make every day.
Absolutely. Alicia, I'd like to hear from you, because there are some parallels, I suppose, when we talk about occupation and colonization and so on here in this country. I mean, you don't have to speak necessarily to those issues, but I'd like to hear what your thoughts are on the movie and about the issues raised here.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned at the start of the session, as an Indigenous person to here, I believe in self-determination and sovereignty. And I think that kind of a veil is being lifted on military operations in the Pacific right now, or like now that everyone's kind of being a bit more active in their activism at the moment, you know, yeah, we're learning a lot. I'm learning a lot here. And so, yeah, I felt the film was incredibly inspiring and concerning that this happened. Yeah, I don't know. I have lots of thoughts.
One of the sorry.
Yeah. But then, yeah, I firmly believe in the power that we all have. So, yeah, that's Absolutely. A good takeaway that I got from that.
Yeah, and one of the things that resonated with me is that, you know, having the courage to speak out against your own society, your own government, your own status quo, which in a way that would reduce the power or reduce the exertion of power. That's a very courageous thing to do, and to actually withhold your participation in that. So I really commend you, Ilan, for your courage and your bravery in that regard, because it can be a very isolating experience if all of your support networks, your family and your friends, you're at odds with them, because it's been the cultural conditioning, and especially across generations. You know, I'm lucky enough to have a couple of parents who have been very supportive of the same kind of ideas that I have, but I know that intergenerationally, you know, there's a cultural conditioning that goes on to protect your own. The other is the other, and if suddenly you're coming out in support of a point of view that is the other, then you're at risk of isolation. Ilan, did you have much experience of that, with being in conflict with family and friends about the ideas and position that you took there?
Absolutely, and it's been ongoing for many years. It's cost me quite a few relationships, and has compromised my family relationships, friendships. I think at the heart of it all is this notion that we don't air our dirty laundry, and we don't talk about these things outside of a Jewish community because it's not safe. So the feeling is that I get from a lot of my friends and family is that, look, if you've got a problem with the way Israel behaves or the occupation, then, you know, write a letter, make a phone call, but keep it in house. And so I've I've faced accusations of being a traitor and a self-hating Jew and all kinds of things over the years, and it's very difficult, to have to choose between what you believe is, morally right and protecting the people you love and not wanting to hurt them. So it's ongoing, and I'm involved with Jewish groups in New Zealand who are opposed to the occupation and opposed to Israel's aggressive policies, and it's an ongoing struggle, and it's just something that each of us has to manage, for your own context.
Absolutely. Tamkin, would you have anything to add in that regard about disentangling the ideological from the pragmatic, and the managing the personal impact of taking a stand which may not necessarily be popular in your own community for justice?
Yeah, definitely. I think that like was said before me, it is such a difficult stance to take if you're ever going to come out in opposition of something. And speaking from the background that I come from, there's a lot of intergenerational space in terms of morals and values. And so if you speak to, anyone that's maybe first generation, or there is that kind of gap, it's so difficult to be able to find common ground. And so it ends up being a situation in which personally young people now, or people who are coming out in opposition, are taking a lot of that on board themselves and are finding it quite draining and impactful, because it's really hard to find support from those who came before you sometimes if you are speaking out in opposition. And so in terms of trying to manage that and trying to move forward, I think it's so important to find other people who are in that same position as you, or who are fighting for the same things that you are. And nowadays that's become increasingly easier with things like social media and being able to connect with people who share the same thoughts as you. And understanding that you're not alone is something that has helped me in what I've done, and other young people who are now coming into that space. But it is incredibly difficult, and anyone who recognizes that they need to, maybe take a step back to look after themselves first, I think is the key in enabling longevity in any of these movements, and ensuring that what we're believing for, we really can fight for, because we're looking after ourselves first and making sure that we have the strength and energy to continue that, because sometimes it is kind of a lone journey.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Well, yeah, it's certainly been a long time from this conflict, and there are a variety of factors, land issues, religion, resource, and we see other countries have also fueled the conflict because they benefit from the oil resource there. But the history goes back a long time, just because of where it is in the world. For anybody who's totally fresh to this issue, such as a student just watching right now, what is some advice or some ideas about how to approach learning about the region without becoming divided, becoming one-eyed, if you like? Because I mean, from an external point of view, and someone who's looked into the history of this region a little bit, I can see the position of the conflicted parties, each of them. What advice would you give to them to be able to build a balanced understanding of what's happening in the region?
Well, we were all probably guilty of sort of working within our own echo chamber and our own bubble of social media and friends, and so you do get that support, but at the same time, there's the danger of only referencing material that you go out to look for. And I think the most important thing is just to speak to your own truth. if you don't have a knowledge of the region or the complexity of the issues, I guess you just need to do your own research, and I guess you just need to be open to having difficult conversations with people that are in opposition to you, and maybe people who are not taking anything as gospel. I think sharing and liking and the social media act of supporting and making your position known is great in some ways, but in some ways it seems to me to only fuel the flames of conflict, because you're just inviting other people to comment on your comments and dislike what you like, and it's just I question the value of it sometimes. I don't know how much it achieves, and so the only thing that I can do, and the only way that I feel comfortable sort of moving forward with my own action is to be truthful to my own experience. But obviously, not everyone has the same experience as I do, and I've got my own position. I've got my own experience to sort of fall back on and say, well, I don't know if it's the truth, but it's my truth. Yeah,
and I think that's a valuable. I don't think it is. It's a valuable perspective, because one thing that really stood out in that movie was her Italia's willingness to engage in the difficult conversations, because as soon as you start listening and stop speaking, or you're actually engaged in a meaningful conversation and you're open to hearing other people's points of view, you gain a new perspective. And that is really at the heart of what conflict resolution is about. Because we had, not to diminish this serious issue here, but one issue of conflict that we had in our own festival was that there was a filmmaker who had put up a synopsis which the subject of the film was unhappy with, and it was only when that was published that the subject of the film said, I'm unhappy about this. And it was an uncomfortable conversation to have about why she was unhappy with it. But they came to an understanding that the filmmaker hadn't consulted with her in the first place about what was going in the synopsis. And when it was pointed out, she was like, oh, I feel attacked, but I'm listening to you and I've heard you. And now I understand your perspective. I haven't thought of your perspective before. And so she then got in touch with us and we said, yes, we can see both sides. We can see where that conflict is coming from and we'll change it. And, it's that difficult conversation at the beginning where you feel awkward about speaking your truth to someone in the fear that you might hurt them or hurt their feelings. But then be willingness, that person is then aware of what the issue is, and then between the two parties they can work it out themselves, and then work with someone else, perhaps a mediator, to get to the best position. And I know that doesn't relate necessarily so cleanly and easily to the Israel Palestine issue, but
I think that the conversation about military is incredibly relatable, especially to Māori and Pacific Island students, because the marketing towards the Māori and Pacific Island community to join the military, and it's the only way you're going to be able to live a life of dignity, and it's the only way you're going to get an education. Because my family is a heavy military family, I think my generation is the only one that hasn't had anyone in it, and we were all kind of told as a child, like, oh yeah, you're gonna follow in granddad's footsteps and things like that. And it was but so then when Anzac Day comes around, I don't know, I've certainly had conversations with family members being like, you're disrespecting your grandfather for not standing at standing at the front of your driveway at 5 a.m. But yeah, so I think that we can find connections, and that's just what I think, is that some things feel like an over there thing. And I don't think that's a particularly helpful perspective when, you know, a natural part of being a human is being empathetic. And so, yeah, I think that students would be able to have some really meaningful conversations about this and learn about it.
Right. Okay. Well, we're getting
I did
close.
talk.
That's what we're here for. Okay. Well, we're getting close to time. Tamkeen, Ilan, I'd like to hear just any last thoughts that you would like to share with our students and teachers about your experiences, about your hopes for the future, about your feelings around the issue and the film.
Well, I thought the film was quite profoundly quite profound and quite sensitive and quite subtle. You know, I think she spent 6 months, or probably I'm sure a lot longer, considering this issue, and just really listening and really watching and really thinking about it, and not having a solid position. You know, all the way through the film, I was still unsure about whether she was going to go in or not, and I guess that was part of the film's magic, was that it did leave that open, that possibility that she would join and she would say, well, I'll make a difference from within. And I think it does give some credence to the idea that maybe you can make a difference from within. That you know, objecting and not serving is the only way. Like I served, I objected, and here I am 20 years later still objecting. And I think the movement in Israel is getting stronger, and the Jewish diaspora around the world is getting more vocal in their opposition to Israel's belligerence, to be honest. And I'm hopeful. You know, I'm hopeful that we'll get somewhere. Don't know where we're going to get to, but you know, we're fighting the good fight.
Very good.
Hey, thank you, Ilan. Tamkeen?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it was an incredibly profound movie, and I think that it's one that will be really valuable to students that are watching it. And my hope is that for anyone that does have a passion or something that they're really invested in, I hope that we will learn to approach issues in the same way that Atalia did, you know, with openness and kindness and empathy, and that willingness to expose yourself to the areas that are affected and what's really going on in her circumstance. It was the Israel-Palestine conflict, but that is something, you know, what we're learning from her way of approaching this is something that we can all use in our lives every day. Whether that be something that you're passionate about or something that you're starting to learn about. And yeah, I think it's just about being open and honest with yourself and really, really making conscious decisions to learn more.
Wonderful. Okay, well, learning more is what we're all about here at Doc Edge Schools. So I'd like to thank my guests, Tamkeen Syed and Ilan. Sorry, Bloomberg? Ilan Bloomberg. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And to Alicia for working in the background, making this all possible, as well as all of the Doc Edge staff and particularly the Ray Foundation. So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you for the next session if you can make it, and really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you very much.
Feel free to enjoy the rest of the films on our program too. Okay. As thanks for
awesome.
Okay, have a great day, everybody. We'll catch you again soon.
You too. Bye bye.